Cool. Hi, everyone. So my name is Adam Kindle. I'm the co-founder of Gather and Found, and also run the CTOs and Founders platform, which is a C-level network community for basically the European founder community, network CEOs and CTOs. And today we're joined by David Brear, who's the group CEO of 11FS. So thanks for joining us, David.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, good stuff. So I think I've said before a few times. I mean, I don't think there's many people who haven't heard of 11FS who've been really kind of watching your journey. It's been really impressive, and you guys are doing things a little bit differently. So I mean, just to kind of get started, really. I mean, how are you guys finding things, and what does it look like for you? How have things changed over the last few weeks with COVID and coronavirus?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think on a personal level, it's really, really difficult. A couple of my family members are in that particularly sort of in at-risk category. So, I mean, not being able to go see my mum and actually see her and help her is really, really tough. I mean, couple that with genuinely, I love the people I work with. So not being able to kind of be around those guys on a day-to-day basis is a difficult thing for people to kind of deal with over this period. Then if you throw on top of that everything that's happening from a global economy perspective, and inevitably the downturn that we're going to see from both an economy, markets, and the rise of unemployment, it's a pretty tough time to kind of do all of these things together. I think if there's one silver lining of all of this is, I mean, I've seen people have businesses where, they sort of get into trouble, and the difficulty is that it's just happening to them. The rest of the world is continuing on in the way that it would do, at least in this. And like I say, it is a very thin silver lining, but a silver lining all the same, is we're all sort of in the same boat. The world is affecting everybody. Everything that's happening with Corona is happening to every individual, professionally and personally. So actually, we're seeing amazing things happening. People really pulling together. We're seeing competitors working collectively to make sure that there's a brighter future for everybody. And from 11FS's perspective right now, we really see this as two major. It's like a camel. There's sort of two humps on this one. The first one very much is around when we get to go back to work. We were sort of at the beginning of this saying it's probably a 3-month working from home process. Thankfully, from the get-go, we've been a remote business. So even now that we're at 200 people working from home with Google Hangouts and Zooms and G Suite and all of these different types of things, make it really easy to do. I think if you've got things like Google set up and Slack set up, then actually you can quite happily sort of work remotely anyway. I think the next wave of it, which is the economic meltdown that comes after this, is probably going to be more difficult to navigate, because with anybody's predictions, whether it's Goldman Sachs or the FT or whoever you read, everybody's predicting this to be 3 times worse than where we were with 2008, and that was not a good place to be in to starters. So it's tough, but we're pretty tough as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, everyone is kind of experiencing different things. And I think, as you said, that kind of personal, the personal side of things in terms of just getting the environment ready to work from home. There are people who have families, people who don't have families. Everyone has a different sort of situation. But I think one thing we've seen is just huge understanding, I think, from the industry, from the market. Everyone's completely respectful of each other's kind of personal situation. And yeah, as you mentioned as well, we've seen so much collaboration over the last sort of few weeks. As you said, competitors who normally, wouldn't necessarily want to give people kind of the best tricks. I'm sure everyone's keeping the best cards up their sleeve, but people are really, really kind of putting together, I think, to help everyone, and I guess just kind of provide a support system, which has been great. And I think you guys have been obviously fantastic with that. Really busy with the podcast, the breakfast shows, which have been fantastic. So, just coming on to that, I mean, no one can predict how bad it's going to be. Everyone knows it's going to be bad, but you can't. There's no crystal ball, I guess, for what we're gonna come into. I suppose just from where you guys were, prior to lockdown, the kind of plans you were on, how has that affected your business? Obviously, with your sort of core, the core business, what are you doing internally, I guess, to potentially set yourself up for the changes that may come, and how are you kind of doing your research into that, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, thankfully, there's particularly within our consulting business, there's long-standing relationships and projects that we have underway that mean that actually there's some good predictability of kind of revenue over the next couple of quarters. I think the challenge for anybody right now is, and anybody who's running, if you're the CEO listening to this of a small business, then you're in the situation where you've got usually three levers. You've got how much money you've got in the bank, you've got how much money you spend, and then you've got how much money you can put in the bank, right? Right now, your control over revenue is going to be quite tough. In most walks of life, in most industries, most people's customers are dealing with the same things that they are, meaning they're going to be heavily distracted in terms of new business flow and extensions of anything that's kind of in the mix. I think if you're looking immediately, you've got to be in a situation where you're controlling your costs really effectively. And that will be, places like HMRC are doing great things for deferring payments. I've heard lots of good, stories of people's rent being deferred for good periods of time to give them the ability to really weather this initial storm. And then obviously everything that actually the government are doing, both in terms of furlough and various other schemes that are being announced on a daily basis as they look to make sure that nobody is really sort of left behind. So it's difficult. I wish there was a three-step program to kind of ensure you navigated these waters, but the reality of it is on a day-to-day basis, making the decisions that actually take into account actually what really creates the brightest future for your business. It's an interesting one. We're in a pretty privileged position, which is we've been bootstrapped from the beginning. So I don't have a board or investors breathing down my neck telling me that the decisions that I should and shouldn't be making. So I can really balance out the decisions that I make across 11FS for both the future of 11FS as a company, but every individual that's in 11FS as well. And because of that, I can act in a slightly different way than I would have to do if VCs were telling me to slash costs by 70% in this period.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think just on that with the VCs, yeah, we've seen some pretty interesting things, I guess, from a lot of the businesses we work with who are heavily backed by VCs. Even very well-funded businesses have really kind of slashed everything, to kind of make sure that they're in a good position for when things do change. And yeah, it's interesting. Just around kind of the culture and I guess how you run as a company. You're a very community-driven business. It seems like you give, you're very encouraging and wanting people to be active and very vocal in your market, which, sometimes I guess you don't find as much within consulting, I think, which is where, obviously being a challenger in that space, that's obviously something you're looking to change. But
yeah, I'd say, our secret sauce on that one is, prioritize the culture of your business over literally everything else, because there's so many organizations who don't really realize that their business is only their business because of the people that are in the business. The success in terms of the revenue you generate, the ideas, the culture that's there, and the way that sustains the business. All of these things only exist because of your people. Now that's not kind of making kings and queens within your organization. It's about the type of people that you bring. But our vision is very clear, but our mission for us is just about unleashing potential in people. We say it's like our vision is to change the fabric of financial services, but our mission is just to unleash talent. Because if we can create the environment where people do the best work that they have ever done in their life because they understand it better, or they're more motivated, or they're given the environment where they can actually do that and make decisions and move things forwards, it just makes sense, right? In this period, I'm saying about controlling costs, for any organization right now, listening to this, it's going to be the biggest cost is going to be people. And if you're not confident that the people that you have are providing the value that you need them to do across the business, then that's going to be a real difficult thing. And most people, for me, somebody will join an organization and people will be like, well, they didn't live up to the potential. But I think a lot of that is down to people providing the platform for people to do the best work. And a big part of that is knowing what you stand for, defining the culture that you want to have as an organization, really understanding what your values are as a company, and then making sure you're making that really clear to people. It's really hard to say to somebody they're not doing the right thing if you've never told them what they should be doing in the first place. So for us, I mean, my background is more sports than it is business, really, and I've kind of brought as much sports thinking into how we've set up the culture. Just simple things like we just said. It's like, actually, like, you wouldn't put a sports team together and not tell them the tactics you want them to play, and you wouldn't not give somebody, a striker, feedback about going to the wrong post every time. Like, you do these things all the time because actually the collective focus of that sports team is to make the team better. And from our perspective, if you really lead with transparency on communication, authenticity in terms of how you deliver these things to people, and then actually incrementally ensuring that you are all on the same side of the table, metaphorically, in terms of driving to achieve the objective that you all commonly hold. Like, it's no surprise that people work better and are more productive at that time period. I mean, for us, there's a bunch of stuff that we do which, like you say, in this period, we've just externalized it because actually it's things that have been really, really useful for creating our culture. But actually, now that we're in this situation where we sort of almost figured out how we would do it distributed for our workforce at 11FS, and then realized, well, why don't we just distribute this for everybody? Because whether it's, I mean, our Alex, one of our audio engineers, has been doing a daily music mix. He's just an amazing DJ, releases that every day into our Slack channel. And I was like, why don't we just put this out? So we started distributing those publicly, and that's, the listenership for those is amazing. But even, I mean, Zoe, my business manager, does a daily yoga session now that even people like the CTO of IBM are joining that every morning to sort of get their yoga on and start that stuff. So, I mean, it's things like this where things that are useful to you as an organization, when we've got this beautiful distribution channel that is called the internet, then actually it's no more effort for us to support everybody than it is just supporting 200 people at 11FS.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, looking ahead, there's a lot of talk, a lot of debate around how the landscape, I think, is going to change, now that more people, I mean, for me personally, I've got 2 young children. So for me, I'm actually pretty keen to get back to the office, to be honest with you. I love my kids. But yeah, I think for me, finding that balance has actually been pretty tough. And I think a lot of people have had that. But on the flip side, a lot of people are finding that they're actually very productive. They're doing some really, really great work from home. It's probably easier, I think, meetings as well. They're probably a little more efficient now. There's no kind of just wasted sort of chats, which I think you need that in a business because that's obviously where you build relationships as well. But how do you, realistically see this going to change, I guess, over the next kind of few weeks and coming out of lockdown back into normal ways of working?
Yeah, I mean, I hope there's a lot of people that'll take a lot of the positives from this time period, like you say, in terms of focus and actually what to say no about. Because, I mean, a lot of people's lives get filled up with, their diary gets filled up with meetings that are not really aligned to the things that they really need to be doing on a day-to-day basis to meet their objectives. So I'm hoping this level of focus is there. I think what you'll find is there's probably a lot of slightly more senior people in organizations who are adapting to this probably slightly better. And anybody who is new to the workplace are probably struggling a little bit more. I think if you find the people who haven't really been used to work in that time period, because, I mean, my background, I mean, before 11FS, I've worked at management consultancies and big organizations. This is the longest period of time in the last 10 years I've actually spent at home. Similar to you, I've got 2 kids in the other room that my wife is doing an amazing job of stopping them killing each other right now. So the world could do with getting back to normal about now. Like I say, both from a personal and a professional perspective, really, in terms of being able to sort of continue in what we're doing. But I mean, for us, again, this has not really changed it too much. We really believe in sort of atomizing priorities. To the point where actually the entirety of the organization sets and says to everybody what their priority is every single day, because it's just a great way of reinforcing connective tissue between people within the organization and actually understanding where people can actually help with one another. So I think for many people, I actually hope some big organizations realize that, having a culture of trusting people to do the work wherever they are, where work can fit around their lives rather than the other way around, actually leads to really productive people. And all of the fear that people had around remote working and, can we trust our people to when we can't see them, hopefully is really sort of dissipated, because I think people are doing an amazing job. I mean, definitely within 11FS, we've seen no dip in productivity in any way, shape, or form. But we're just allowing people to work around or work around life. Like you say, 2 kids. I mean, I'm surprised one of my kids haven't walked in the back of this already, if I'm honest with you. So, but you have to. Everybody, it seems to have just relaxed a little bit, which is great. So whether we're dealing internally or whether we're dealing with a gigantic global bank, somebody's dog walking in or somebody's kid walking in, or there being connectivity issues or whatever, people are making the best of the situation in order to ensure that we all just kind of keep moving forward. It's like people have developed a slightly more human level of tolerance, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was just going to say, just around that kind of human element. I've lost count of family calls. My daughter's walked in dressed as Elsa from Frozen or something, and yeah, I think that there's just that kind of level of understanding where people just get it, and they sort of have to adapt to the environment that we're in. And with that, I mean, the message seems fantastic. As a business, I think that's probably a big part of the success that you've seen. Just to kind of take us back then, so when you kind of first set the business up, and there's just a few of you, have you stayed completely true to what you set out to do? Have you had to change in any way? And yeah, I guess how did you sort of start to put those ideas together? What was the most important thing? Value, mission, vision. How did you kind of set that up, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, and I was working at Gartner, so I was running their global digital banking practice. Left that on the inkling that there was something that we could do to sort of move a lot of these models forwards. For me, it always comes back to your vision and your mission. Can you establish a vision and a mission, especially when you're trying to start an organization? Can you start a vision and a mission that actually gets other people motivated by what you're doing? Because if you can do that, and you can create that sort of magnetism around the thing that you're doing, the thing that you're driving, then actually what you'll find is you'll start to get people to sort of get involved with what you're doing really, really quickly anyway. For me, and we've talked about this a lot over the course of 11FS's 4 years now, is our purpose was pretty clear. We were there because we see big banking organizations spending billions of pounds and not really achieving the thing that they set out to do. And actually, with that purpose, and with a lot of our narrative is around really digital banking only being 1% finished, despite all of the efforts, despite all of the stuff that's been put in place. And with that purpose, with that thesis, that narrative around the organization, can you use that as a magnet for the type of talent that you need to then make not only a good idea, but create the credibility in the space that can actually make those things happen? And for me, it's sort of as simple as that. Success for me is momentum. Being able to convince Jason Bates, who was co-founder of Monzo and CPO over there, that this was something that we could do. That one bank was great, but what about if we went and built 50 all over the planet, of all the different types, as well as Simon Taylor, who was running R&D for the blockchain division in Barclays, Ross Methven, who was running a successful research firm over in called Mapper. Actually, to be able to galvanize and create that magnet that pulled those people together, really that narrative has not changed very much. Actually, what we believe in, we've kind of focused a little bit more on it. And actually, when it comes to the things that change as you scale, really it's about when you pull a small group of people together, the things that connect you are personality and the bits that you carry around in your brain. When you start getting to 50 people, the processes that you put in break. communication processes, or any type of process you can possibly put in place when you are starting will have broken by 50, and then by 100, and then by 150, and then by 200. We must have gone through 50 different iterations of our team meeting, because at one point it was like 5 of us on a Google Hangout. By the time it was 50, we needed to change the format of it quite dramatically. I mean, we used to run a Friday meeting that was highlight, low light, and who gets your shout out. What was the great thing that happened this week? What sucked, and how can we help? And who in the company went out of their way to help you more than anybody else this week? When you start hitting 50 people, that meeting is suddenly it's like an hour and a half. When you hit 100 people, then that's nearly a day of your time. So how you keep iterating these things is really, really important. And then actually the stuff that what was really interesting was the stuff that myself and Ross and Jason and Simon would do automatically. We realized that actually we're in a really privileged situation. I mean, I've worked for 15 years across big companies and small companies, startups and big banks and big consultancies, all sorts. Jason's worked at Accenture and Monzo and Starling and all these other companies, and Simon's worked at TSYS and Barclays and all these different places. The stuff that we just do automatically because of that experience actually isn't automatic to everybody. So and the nuance of when you're such a purpose-driven organization, you actually need to continually make sure that you're writing down the rationale. So for us, I mean, we lived for 3 years on 3 main premises, really, which was the belief that digital banking is 1% finished, the focus that actually it was about getting shit done. This was the mentality that we had. It was about focus on delivery, about execution, because in our minds, startups don't starve. They drown. Usually it's like 1,000 good ideas and 1,000 opportunities. How do you focus on the thing that's most critical? And then the third one of those, which was our blanket coverage for pretty much every policy that you can have, was just don't be a dick. And actually, whether it was, hey, the best example I always come to is like travel policy. We still don't have a travel policy. We have the use your judgment. In some instances, if coronavirus is hitting and you're in Singapore and the only last seat is a £27,000 one to get out of Singapore to get home, then actually that's okay. But in normal circumstances, use your judgment of whether business class or first class, or that sandwich is billable or not, basically. Because what we found actually through our careers is most organizations take out people's personal ability to make decisions. If I tell you you've got £50 to spend, you'll spend £50. If I tell you to spend what you need to spend, you'll use your personal judgment on what those things are. And I really, really believe on, I talk a lot about we're more like the special forces than we are the army. We will tell people what we want to do, but we believe in our people to figure out the best way of actually making those things happen. We are I think a triumph in macro management, which means we really believe that we're good at hiring smart people, and then we really believe in our people to do the right thing.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's as you've kind of touched on there, just with the kind of expenses and stuff like that, it's just treating people like adults and actually giving them the ability and the opportunity to actually kind of do things for themselves.
It's interesting because giving people responsibility, and it's a balancing act between giving people responsibility and making sure people are aware that they are accountable. Because when you have complete transparency, then actually the ability for everybody to make the organization more successful is there. And actually then it doesn't lay down to, I mean, so many organizations I've worked in, your ability to do work is denoted by how senior you are within that organization. From our perspective, if somebody's got a great idea, it's a great idea. I don't care where it's coming from or whose idea it is. If it's a good idea, let's do it. And I think it leads to a very different level of accountability that people take for the things that they're driving forward for the organization. So again, I should say, I mean, I say this a lot, is a lot of people don't understand culture, and they think it's some sort of fluffy thing that materially doesn't impact anything. But if you have great people and a bad culture, you won't keep the people for very long, and they won't be very productive, and your company won't be very productive. If you have a very focused culture that is based around ensuring that actually you're helping people do the best work that they've ever done, the performance of the business will be 11x what it should be. And that's really the secret that we've had is, I mean, it's not really a secret. It's like, hey, bring really smart people together, allow them to do the best work that they've ever done. Like, we really shouldn't be surprised that this works, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%. And with, when people start, software engineers, architects, different business leaders within the company, do you have like a workshop around, your story, your mission, that they sort of get given that introduction? I guess they get that through the process when they join you guys anyway, right? But yeah, how do you kind of set them up to really feel a part of, the 11FS family, and how do you give them that kind of platform to make sure that they're, within that culture straight away?
Yeah, so from our I mean, having values is one thing, but actually what you do with them is so much more important. And like I mean, I always use Enron as a good bad example, depending on which way you want to sort of look at it. If your values are literally just something that is a poster on a wall, then they're not really very meaningful. You have to be confident that your management team and every individual in your organization lives these things day in, day out, else they're meaningless. So for us, actually creating those values and the attributes, and for anybody listening to this, if you head over to my LinkedIn profile, we've put out there all of our values or attributes for everybody else to see, as well as the process in which we went about to create them to help anybody else that we can do. What we sort of found with that is, embedding them into hiring processes. One thing I'd say, I mean, we've been hiring for culture, or like almost for day one. It got to the point where, I mean, just keeping up with CVs was almost impossible, if I'm honest with you. So I didn't actually look at CVs at all for about a year period until we'd spoken to the person. But I only spoke to the people who sort of passed the cultural test to start with. For me, there was four main questions that I asked at the beginning of an application process, and with people's level of effort and context and humor in those things, did they then get a interview? And it was for us, it was just shorthand for you can hire really, really smart people, but if they're smart people who don't fit into the culture or add to the culture that you've got, or work in a similar way that the people within your organization work in, then it will be a difficult thing for those guys to fit in, especially in periods of time where you're growing so exponentially. And we're a pretty fast-paced organization. Getting people up to speed is really important. I mean, the other thing I'd say is, from the second that people sign a contract that they're joining 11FS, we have a detailed program of onboarding. Onboarding doesn't start from the day that they, arrive at the office, or I guess in this context, stay at home. But it starts from the minute that they sign the contract, because really, or even beyond that, I mean, everything that we put out there from a content perspective, that where we're helping the community, gets people to understand how we are as a company. We are ridiculously transparent when it comes to who we are and how we act. Because what I found is the difference between those two things. How many organizations have you seen market themselves as something, but when people get inside that organization, they're like, there's none of this stuff exists. Like, they were lovely stories, but now the reality is that none of that stuff is there. And actually, I mean, I should say that we're not perfect, but we will always be work in progress. And I think if you're honest about what you're good at, and you're honest about what you're bad at, and actually you show people those things transparently day in, day out through social media, or conversations like we're having today, it sets people's expectations of where those things are,
Yeah.
not just for employees, but for clients as well. I say a lot of the stuff that we do on podcasts or blog posts or whatever is really just damage limitation of setting people's expectations of that first meeting that we have with them, because we're exactly the same people that we are on the podcast or right now as I would be talking to a CEO or a board at a bank. And And that for me is like, it's a coping mechanism. um, if you're not like that, work is really hard. Like if you have to pretend to be a different person and act in a different way, like life is tough. But when you are really yourself during that period, remembering that golden rule of not being a dick, then actually you can really do an amazing amount of work, and you can really have a pretty big impact on the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's kind of weighing up ability versus passion, I guess, as well. You can quickly see the people that buy into your vision, want to be part of your journey. And, I'm sure,
100%.
yeah,
Pa-
so much.
pas- Passion and positivity are such huge things for me. I think people can lose translation and what they think positivity is. I've seen a lot of people kind of think, there's a lot written about sort of toxic positivity, always looking on the bright side. But I think if you're if you've got a sort of an entrepreneurial mindset, you're always looking for opportunity. And whatever happens, whatever circumstance happens, it's the people who react to that circumstance quickly, then quicker than the market can do, quicker than the competitors can do, to be in a situation where they're actually able to seek opportunity and seek advantage within those things. It's like principle 101 of evolution, right? It's adapting to change. And really all that's happened, I mean, taking it full circle back to Corona again, it's like what's happened in the world right now is the market has fundamentally shifted. Those organizations who are still trying to do the same thing that they did pre-corona right now and hoping it all goes away are going to be the ones that I think are going to most struggle in this. The ones who are really adapting now to processes, practices, food chain, communication methods with customers, all of those things are so critical to make sure that actually the environment that you work in is sustainable for you as a business. So yeah, I mean, this sucks in a major way for everybody, but in that there's always opportunity.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, which companies sort of come out of this. I mean, I think as a company, we had, I think, 6 or 7 days in our office before we kind of had to shut everything down and move out. So, I think the plans that a lot of people, maybe wrote at the start of the year, definitely going to fundamentally change. However, I guess, from your side, with the, the clients you work with and, the leaders that you're speaking with from a client perspective, how has their mindset changed? I guess again, it's about trying to predict, setting yourself up now, trying to predict about what's going to happen. Have you seen a huge shift in how a lot of your clients are working and how you're working with them to support them through this?
I think I'd say we're in a sort of privileged place that we work with people sort of globally. So I think if you look at the impact that's happening over in the US right now, it's a bit of a whiteout. Those guys are really in the eye of the storm when it comes to everything that's happening with the pandemic. So it's a lot more difficult for those guys to try and create any sort of business continuity in terms of what they're doing, because their focus is so much on providing stability and services for their customers.
Yeah.
I think the thing that we've sort of seen more with clients that we have, either in the Middle East or Far East, like China and Japan and Singapore and whatnot, actually business is starting to return, albeit at a sort of reduced capacity in terms of what's happening there. So I think, globally, the reaction is different depending on really what circumstances that they're dealing with. Um, it's hard because we're sort of in a situation. If this was a tornado or a hurricane or something, we could batten down the hatches and say that within 3 to 5 days we would be dealing with the fallout rather than actually dealing with the hurricane. Right now, globally, the hurricane and the fallout are happening in parallel, sequentially, repeatedly, given how this infection kind of works. So, I mean, this is really the most difficult thing for SMEs and businesses of all sizes at this stage. Is we just don't know how long this is going to last. The reality is that we might all be working from home for another 2 months. If it goes really badly and things tick up again, this could be 6 months. From an economy perspective, actually Q4 might get back together, or it might be Q4 2024 before we start seeing the markets kind of return to the space that we're at. So it's difficult dealing with If I had one superpower, it's dealing with ambiguity. Um, if I had two, it's sleeping when I'm stressed. So thank goodness for those two ones, because I think without them in this time period, then I think I'd probably be in a very different place.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think sleeping when stressed. Yeah, that's a great one to have. So we're kind of coming into the last kind of few minutes now. So just I guess just as kind of like a few kind of leading points for tips and advice. If there are CEOs and leaders out there, which there are, who are experiencing huge challenges. A lot of companies as well, even with the furlough, that's not necessarily that's not the finished solution, right? That's not going to help everybody out for the next 9 months. So, what are the kind of the key things, obviously, that people should be doing right now to make sure, they survive, they're still healthy, and, just to make sure that they're kind of maintaining their own sanity, really, and looking at the right things. What are kind of just the core things as a bit of a leading point, really, that people need to be doing right now?
I'd say, keeping your own sanity, as you said at the top of this is, you have your professional and your personal life. Don't let your personal life be down too far on your priorities, given everything that's happening, because come what may, that will be there. So make sure you're kind of building your professional life on the stability of your personal life, and your husband, your wife, your kids will sort of thank you for that down the line, because it's a critical kind of bedrock to build everything else off. From a professional life, I'd say you are gonna have very limited control right now over the revenue side of your business, given everything that's happening. The thing that is within your control is the costs across your organization. I think nobody's going to look back on this in 6 months' time and say, I wish I hadn't saved so much money. So do everything you can right now to ensure that you can create continuity for your business, but that you're creating efficiencies, and you're reducing spend. Negotiate with your suppliers hard. Negotiate with your office provider hard. Really look into what is it across your business that isn't putting more money in the bank, and actually make sure you're taking advantage of the government schemes that are out there. I think the rest of it really is perseverance, because this is not you can look at a spreadsheet for as long as you like. There is not a chess move or a mind trick you can do to get you through this. What is going to happen is real perseverance across this, and remembering fundamentally, as I said at the top, your business is only your business because of your people, and actually, as many of your people as you can really get to understand the difficulty of the decisions that you're making over this time period, will mean that inevitably, if you get to the point where tough decisions need to be made, then you'll find a lot more understanding from the people that you're kind of working with. So, if you're just now getting to the point where transparency of communication and authenticity through that period is something that's happening, it's going to be a tough sell to kind of flip to that switch right now. But if you've been doing it, I'd say the critical really is, whatever your culture is, whatever the values are within your organization, now is not the time to lose them. Now is the time to really double down on what it is that makes you you.
Yeah, no, of course. And we've all heard some really good and some pretty bad stories, I guess, as well, in terms of how that has been communicated with staff. And yeah, it's just having that kind of trust, isn't it? The honesty, transparency, obviously, is so key. You should never admit bad news. It has to come out, right? So why sort of sit back on it? You need to have that relationship with your staff. So yeah, no, some great points. And one thing I always really like to ask people as well is that, over the journey that you've been on the last 4 years, 10, 15, 20, you may be the exact same sort of guy that you were sort of 15, 20 years ago. You may be different. I mean, if you could sort of go back and just give yourself a piece of advice, what would that be? What would you say to a younger David Brear?
So it's an interesting one. I'm so grateful for what I get to do today. I'm not sure I'd change anything through that journey. It's like the plot of Back to the Future 2. I almost wouldn't want to change anything, because if I did, then I might not be able to do the thing that I'm doing right now. But I think the thing that I'd definitely say, if I could go back, was work harder.
Okay.
Um, because I mean, I've been very lucky that actually, my background was more sports than business, and I was just naturally quite good at sports. Therefore, I didn't really have to try very hard, and I could sort of outperform in terms of that space. And sadly, I took that approach to academia. And it wasn't until I tore all the ligaments in my left knee and had to get a proper job that I realized that actually there was a correlation between effort and impact. Because actually, when you're not naturally good at something and you actually have to try, you start to understand what real effort actually is. So if I could go back to a 15, 16-year-old me, it would be put in as much effort into your academic life as you did your sporting life, because ultimately, when you look at assurances of careers at the end of the day, that one's going to be much more assured than the other side of things. Thankfully, when I got to the age of 23, I realized there was this correlation. And if I'm honest with you, if I could give anybody one tip, it was the flip that went off in my head. The switch that went off was just work harder than everybody else around you. And that's all I've done ever since.
Sure. Would you change the injury?
Do you know, it's an interesting one. Do you know, I love what I'm doing now. So I mean, I could have done without a knee like a watermelon for a couple of months, but other than that, I think I'd live with it. There's not much that I would change. I think in order to have a business run in the way that we run a business, then I still would have wanted all of those experiences, and actually, I still would have wanted to know what that side of competition really, really feels like, because we embody so much of that in terms of how we act on a day-to-day basis at the company. We are on a macro an aggressive company, as in our understanding of the industry and what needs to change in the industry, we are very clear on and not scared of saying about it. But on the micro level, we are the most human organization that you can kind of come across. And exactly as you would do on a sports team is, you want to win, you want to change the industry, you want to do that, you want to define what that means. Now in a business context, winning is not what it is within a sporting context. In a business context, winning is infinite in terms of the objectives that you can kind of set around it. So the context is different, but we're bringing in all of the things that that I learned all the way through that period, which for me, lets me at least get off a little bit of the competitive nature that I have still brimming in my brain. So no, I don't think I'd change anything. I'd probably still take the knee and the pins as it stands.
Yeah, no, fine, fair enough. And yeah, I mean, we're all hoping that sport comes back soon as well, right? So fingers crossed.
Yeah, that would be good.
But look, David, thanks for your time. Really, really appreciate it. I was going to say, obviously, you guys are still continuing to onboard and hire, so continue to reach out to your kind of TA teams. I mean, you're pretty open in, welcoming, I guess, feedback or, just people reaching out to you. So, I mean, through LinkedIn as well would be a good place for guys to reach out and continue to get in touch.
Yeah, you can find me, I mean, pretty much on every social network at this stage. LinkedIn's the place that I'm preferencing most, or if you want to hit me on email, it's just david@11fs.com.
Sure, perfect stuff. Well, David, thanks for your time. I'm sure everyone's going to be really interested in hearing the story and continuing to watch you guys, grow over the next few years. So, best of luck with the growth and thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me on.
Cheers, David.